Hey everybody, Tim Adams here with another episode of Church Tech. And today we're going to be talking about wireless display adapters and digital signage. So I'm actually going to kind of take a back seat here and let two of our esteemed Hangout veterans kind of take it up from here. We're going to start with Charles Smith, who's going to be talking about wireless adapters and kind of the pros and cons of some of the more popular ones. And then we were going to have Tim Malone, who works at a healthcare company, manages quite an extensive digital signage network, kind of talk to us about when you're starting to get to a certain number of screens, at what point do you need to start thinking about a digital signage solution versus just a wireless display adapter? So Charles, with that, why don't you take us through your little presentation?
Okay, so kind of to start out, kind of give a case history of where we were with our church. We have a youth room that originally kind of inherited the old sanctuary projector, and they had like a PA system that they used for external events. And they wanted to use that originally just in their classroom, to put up like YouTube videos and stuff. And it worked okay for a while, older projector from the sanctuary, quite dim, using a borrowed laptop, but they were looking for options where they could kind of really bring it to the next level, technology-wise, to support kind of the devices everybody carries with them, like tablets, smartphones, and just being able to wirelessly put whatever's on their smartphone or their tablet up on a TV. So we allocated some money, bought a TV for the church, and before we bought devices to display information on that TV, I kind of tested and reviewed several products. Um, but before we go into those specific products, when you're going to share information wirelessly to a TV or something like that, you need to review the terminology and the standards that are out there and available. So I'm going to do a little screen share here right quick. And if Tim or somebody else will just comment when they see my screen share in the chat window.
It's thinking about it.
All right. Just let me know when it's up,
There we go.
guys. So this is actually a link that Tim Adams put in the invite to this Hangout session, which is a link I've also had for quite a while. I'm guessing probably Tim was the source of this. But it goes through the different wireless display standards that are out there and available. Of course, it starts out talking about HDMI if you're going to wire something to a TV, which with the TV we've got, we still have like a 25-foot HDMI cable and a little box that converts VGA to HDMI if you have an older laptop as a way to backtrack it. But like I say, the best way to do this is to do this wirelessly, right, with no wires. So the first standard that you've got out there is called AirPlay. And AirPlay is actually an Apple protocol, for lack of better terms, for sharing information on a screen. And it's probably the best protocol out there right now. And that sounds funny coming from me because I'm not typically an Apple person. But it is pretty well supported. They were kind of the first kid on the block that really got support for it. A lot of apps jumped on the bandwagon, and it works really well. What its biggest selling point is, as far as AirPlay, is the ability to not just take an app and send what's in that app to a screen as far as like a video feed. Say you've got a YouTube video pulled up on your mobile device. You can send that YouTube video to your Apple TV and have it show up on your TV screen and just use your mobile devices like a remote control for YouTube. But what really makes AirPlay awesome is if you've got an iPhone or an iPad or even an iPod, that's one of the ones that's the iPod Touch, you can not just share apps that support AirPlay, but you can share your entire, as I call it, desktop. So you can share, if you want to put up text messages or tweets that are coming in on a subject while something's coming up, you can put that on the screen. And it works pretty good for the most part. I have seen some apps where the full screen sharing with AirPlay doesn't really work that well, but I've kind of isolated it down to be an app support issue more so than a device support issue. But for the most part, I'd say 90% of the things I've tested with AirPlay works pretty good. Now, the next protocol that's out there is one called Miracast, and it was the one that was kind of slated to be the one for Android devices, and even Windows 8 jumped on the bandwagon for it. But everybody out there, I mean, you can read this article, and the bottom line it gets out to is everybody out there kind of has their version of Miracast, if you will. And if you don't have your Miracast versions matched up just right, things won't share properly. So I really didn't mess with many Miracast devices, mainly because they're kind of hard to find. The next protocol out there after Miracast is this WIDI, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it because I'll probably butcher it, but let's just call it WIDI for lack of better terms. It was something that Intel came up with for sharing information across screens, and once again, it's another one that never really caught on, and later on in its history, it just tried to jump on the Miracast bandwagon, so it's supposed to support itself and Miracast. Never really got much traction. Now, the next one, this is probably the one I would rank right behind AirPlay, is Chromecast, which it's kind of interesting. Chromecast is not just the name of the protocol, the wireless protocol, but it's also the name of a product. And we'll talk about that product more in detail later, but the Chromecast is what's really caught the support of most Android devices. And for the most part, Chromecast works pretty good, but it is very limited in two areas. One, you have to have an app that supports Chromecast, or two, you have to have one of the latest versions of the Android operating system to be able to share your entire screen or your entire desktop. So if you've got Android 2.0 or 3.0, no, forget about it. If you've got Android 4 something, maybe. I forgot the exact version that screen sharing started becoming supported in Android, but if it's a 4 something or above, whatever that something is, you can do screen sharing. But most of those devices that support screen sharing are probably within, I think, a year and a half old. So if your Android device is more than a year and a half old, you probably can't screen share, but if you've got an app that supports Chromecast, you could still share that app. Now, the next thing here, which has actually been around for quite a while, I'd say it's been around since the late 90s, early 2000s, and it goes by several different names. The way I've always referred to it as is Universal Plug and Play, or UPnP. It's also referred to other names like Play 2 or DLNA, which you see here, what the acronym for that stands for on the web page. It's something that's been around for a long time. It never really caught a lot of traction, but it does work fairly well. Once again, it's very prone to version issues. Certain versions of devices only work with certain versions of TVs that support UPnP. So it is kind of prone to version issues, but otherwise it's a pretty solid solution, which I'll talk about more when I show our TV off here in a little bit. And I believe that is the last protocol. So with that being said, we've talked about wireless protocols. So now let me show you some devices that support some of these protocols. So the first one, of course, is the Apple TV, and it supports AirPlay. They go for around $100, specifically $99 plus tax. And with most Apple products, you can rarely ever find them at a discount. Actually, I got lucky when I was buying ours. It was right around that Black Friday time frame, and I was in Staples one day just getting miscellaneous supplies I needed, and I saw this banner up where they were selling it for $80 instead of $100. And I was like, wow! So that's where I swiped one up for the church. But that's like the first time I've ever seen an Apple product discounted like that. So they're kind of on the pricey side out of all these different devices I'm going to show you. It's probably the priciest device out there, but like I said, it still works the best. The next device that's out there is the Chromecast. And the Chromecast almost looks like just like a little USB thumb drive. But instead of it having a USB connector on it, of course, it's got an HDMI connector on it. And it does also have, if you can see my mouse here, a USB connector on the back. And there's one kind of gotcha about the Chromecast device that a lot of people forget about. When you look at this, you think, oh, I'll just plug it up to my HDMI port and I'm done, and it'll work. Not usually most of the time. I know that sounds funny, but most of the time, just plugging it up to an HDMI port will not work because most of your TVs do not put back out enough voltage over their HDMI port to power a device like the Chromecast. They say it's supposed to work with certain TVs. Honestly, I've never found one that it works on yet. But what's neat about the Chromecast is it does come with a little power supply and a USB cable. But what I've done in my case is I've actually taken the USB connector out of here, and instead of running it into that power supply, I ran it into the USB port on my TV. Because most of your more modern TVs have a USB port for firmware upgrades, or even some of them support playing media files from a USB drive. So that's how I have it hooked up. And there's another reason why I have it hooked up to the USB port of the TV, not just for convenience. The Chromecast device, for whatever reason, gets pretty stinking hot to the touch after it's been running for an hour or two. So if you have it hooked up to an external power supply, unless you unplug that power supply, it's running 24/7. Whereas if you plug it up to the USB port on your TV, it gets power from the TV, and when you turn your TV off, the Chromecast goes off, and that gives it a chance to cool back down. So it's a pretty neat device. There are also other devices out there, which I don't have a screen share of that to show you, that claim to support like Chromecast and AirPlay all in one device, and they look just like a Chromecast, except the logoing on them is a little different, and they're like $10 from China. I would advise against buying one of those devices because most of those devices, somebody built it to support one version of Chromecast or one version of AirPlay. They never update it ever again, so you're just going to have nothing but problems with it. You need to stick with a supported device, either a true Apple TV or a true Chromecast, to get support for that device to make sure it works for your current device or any future devices. And long story short, if you're an Android fan, I mean, $35 is not bad. So, I mean, instead of thinking you're going to save money and get a great device for $10 from China, spend the $35. It'll definitely be worth your time. Now, the next device that I've got here to show you is one that's kind of recently just came out around Thanksgiving, Christmas time. It's called the Amazon Fire Stick. So Amazon, they're starting to release products that are trying to compete with Apple, and their devices are okay for, entertainment purposes, watching Netflix or Hulu or things like that. And as you see here in the picture, the Fire Stick comes with a remote. The Chromecast that I showed you earlier does not come with a remote. The only way to kind of control the Chromecast is with your phone. Your phone, when you share something from your phone, it basically sends the video to the Chromecast to put on your TV, and then it gives you like this little remote control interface so you can still control what you're watching on your phone. Amazon, they actually give you a remote, and it works pretty good. The one gotcha on this remote, well, it's a gotcha, and it's also a nice thing. That remote is not your typical infrared remote. It's actually a Bluetooth remote. Most people don't realize that. So the fact that it's Bluetooth is great in one sense, that you've got your Amazon Fire Stick hanging out on a USB or a HDMI port on the back of your TV. If you had a traditional infrared remote, it wouldn't work unless you could somehow magically bounce the signal off your ceiling. But since it's a Bluetooth remote, it'll work within 30 feet. Now, the bad side to it being a Bluetooth remote is if you have a universal remote, let's say you're in a home environment and you've got one of these Logitech universal remotes, which I actually have one, you can't get it to work with the Apple or the Amazon Fire Stick because your Logitech universal remote is infrared only. It doesn't do Bluetooth. So, if you don't like this remote and you want more functionality, they actually make an Android and iOS app that you can use to remote control the Fire Stick with. And that's actually what I've gone to. Of course, your mobile device, you have to be on Wi-Fi for it to find it and whatnot. You can't just be on your cellular network and be able to control your Amazon Fire Stick, but it works pretty good. Now, the Amazon Fire Stick, where its shortcoming is in the screen sharing. It really doesn't support screen sharing much. I've read documentation online saying it supports Miracast, but what did I say earlier about Miracast? Trying to find a device that has Miracast on it and it's compatible and it works. I haven't found one yet. But what's neat about the Amazon Fire Stick is it has an app store because it's basically an Android-based device, and you can install third-party apps onto it. And in my case, I haven't installed a app that mirrors like what Chromecast can do. I'm sure there's one out there. I just haven't hunted for one. But there is an app out there that will do AirPlay. And I installed it on my Amazon Fire Stick, and it works okay. But it's kind of like what I warned you about earlier about buying that $10 device from China and it not supporting all versions of AirPlay properly. It has its glitches. Some things don't play right. Basically, what I've been able to make work right as far as screen sharing with the Amazon Fire Stick is local media on my iPhone or iPad. So like if I've got music or a movie locally stored on my device, or even pictures, it displays those fine. But if you bring up the YouTube app and then try to AirPlay it, doesn't usually work. And of course, full-on screen sharing doesn't work. So that's kind of why I listed this Amazon Fire Stick at the last. It's a neat device for home use, but in a business or church environment, it really doesn't have a place, I don't believe. Now, with that being said, now I'm going to show you a couple of pictures of our setup here. And this is the first shot showing this TV hanging on the wall. Granted, we put extra electrical outlet behind the TV so that it had basically, a no wires feel to it. And it looks pretty good. That's actually a 70-inch TV. We thought at first when we bought a 70-inch TV that it would be too big for the room. But as you can see for this picture, it's about right. So with the next picture here is another shot of it, kind of from an angle. You can see how we've got the TV tilted down a little bit to try to help reduce glare. That's kind of a TV mounting tip that we've talked about earlier in previous Hangouts. Very funny comment there, Tim, about nothing's too big, especially when things are bigger in Texas. Anyways, so yeah, we've got it tilted to kind of reduce glare, which helps out. And then if you look at the top, the next picture, I believe here, we put in a little shelf right above the TV, and that's where the Apple TV sits. And I'm going to kind of digress here. There was something I forgot to mention earlier. The Apple TV, if I remember correctly, and I may be mistaken on this, the Apple TV, its remote, it comes with an included remote, is actually infrared based. So you can't really hide an Apple TV behind a TV. But this sounds redundant. You can't hide an Apple TV behind a TV and have the infrared remote still work. But just like I said with the Amazon Fire Stick, the Apple TV actually has an app you can install on your phone, and if you do want to hide your Apple TV behind the TV, that's just going to drive me nuts every time I say it. If you do hide your Apple TV behind your TV, the remote won't work, but you'll have an app on your phone that you can use to supplement that with. And then I think the last picture here, I've actually got a screen capture of the TV. Actually, when I was taking pictures of this TV, we actually had our Chromecast hooked up, and this is kind of what a Chromecast shows on the screen. So I'm going to kind of go back here about 2 or 3 pictures here. So what we ended up doing at our church is we bought the TV, and when we went shopping for a TV, we went shopping for what I would call nowadays a dumb TV, or it's what all TVs used to be. All TVs used to be, they were flat, they were thin, but they had no computerized features in them. So nowadays I call those dumb TVs because all the other TVs are called smart TVs because they have apps built in. Well, we didn't really want to buy a smart TV because smart TVs are kind of prone to the same problems as the $10 Chinese stick, as I would call it. App support's limited. They don't produce updates. So we went shopping trying to find a dumb TV. Unfortunately, dumb TVs are pretty much gone off the market unless you're really, really hunting for them. So we ended up getting a smart TV. And the smart TV does support a Chromecast-like feature, but it's not as good as the Chromecast. So we've got that in the TV. We've got a Chromecast hooked to it. And we've got an Apple TV. So long story short, if you're looking to buy something like this for your church, I would recommend getting an Apple TV and a Chromecast. Yeah, you'll probably be out $135, but you're going to cover the two largest smartphone manufacturers that exist out there as far as screen sharing or app sharing is available. So it works pretty good for us. Now, there's one gotcha to all of this. Screen sharing for mobile devices works awesomely, for the most part. But let's say you want to go back to the old school ways of, I've got a laptop, let me screen share something from my laptop to the TV. Well, sharing something from your laptop to a TV, really you've got two options available to you wirelessly today. One is if you've got a Chromecast, you can install a Chromecast app into the Chrome, and it has to be the Chrome browser on your PC. You can't do Firefox, you can't do Internet Explorer, it has to be Chrome. You can install a Chromecast extension into the Chrome browser and share whatever's in your browser window up on the TV screen. But there's one catch. Since you're having to do a lot of video processing on your PC, for lack of better terms, to get that off of your computer screen and sent wirelessly to a TV, there's usually about a 5-second lag. So if you start looking at a web page on your laptop and scroll down, 5 seconds later, it scrolls down on the TV, which can be a little jarring and a little bit hard to get used to. And the Chromecast extension actually also supports, let me go back over here to my browser for a second, because I actually have the Chromecast extension installed on my browser, but of course I don't have any Chromecasts in my household. But what it does support that's interesting, I may not be able to do this right now. No, not without a Chromecast device in my house. But usually when you see a Chromecast device in here, there's another little options button or something you can click on here. And you can not only share what's in your Chrome browser, you can share your entire desktop. And it says it's in beta, but for the most part, I've seen it been pretty rock solid as far as working. I mean, you could share a Microsoft Excel document, a Word document, but it's still prone to that 5-second lag. Now, the biggest catch to this, and I'm going to go back to the picture here for an illustration, is let's say you have a laptop and somebody's got a DVD. Well, the challenge is if you try to do a DVD using screen sharing with a Chromecast, it's going to be so laggy, it's not worth fooling with. I mean, it's going to look like, an old-time projection screen where you see things flickering by. I mean, it's bad. So there's another set of options available to you. So I've talked about what you can do with the Chromecast and the Chrome browser on a PC. If you've got iTunes installed on a PC, iTunes can AirPlay stuff to an Apple TV. So if you've got local media on your PC, like a music or a movie file, it'll actually send it to an Apple TV from your PC. But then we go back to the DVD scenario. DVDs and iTunes don't work. iTunes, because of copy protection issues, they didn't include the ability to play DVDs within iTunes. So if you can't play a DVD with iTunes over AirPlay, and you can't play DVDs over a Chromecast, what option do you have? Unfortunately, the only option I've seen, if somebody hands you a DVD and say, here, wirelessly project this on the TV, is you have to rip that DVD to an MP4 file. Once you rip it to an MP4 file, you can either open that MP4 file with Chrome and then Chromecast it from your Chrome browser, or you can open that MP4 file within iTunes and AirPlay it to an Apple TV. So MP4s work really good for that. But you got to be aware of copyright issues. A lot of DVDs are copyright protected, so I'm not going to get into a big discussion there, but basically taking a DVD and making an MP4 of it, you get into some sketchy territory with copyrights. There's some people out there that they can justify doing that if it's a local backup copy. If the man ever came knocking, I'd be a little bit concerned on trying to defend that. Now, with that same thing being said, back to the smart TV. A lot of your smart TVs have a USB port on them, and you can put media on a USB drive and plug it up to your TV and play it that way. if you don't have a laptop or a mobile device. You can just stick it on a thumb drive. So smart TVs are pretty handy for that. Don't want to let you forget about that. Now, for some of the last things to cover, back to the PC thing, there is another option out there available. There's some software you can download and install. If you don't like Chrome, if you think Google is evil, there's some software out there called AirParrot that you can buy, and I believe it's $15. I may be mistaken. But AirParrot's pretty neat. It will actually, after you install it on a PC, it will Chromecast stuff or AirPlay stuff to a Chromecast or an Apple TV. And I played with the demo version of this, and it works pretty stinking good. But once again, with the Chromecast situation, you still got your 5-second lag. You still got your DVD issues. It doesn't overcome those issues, but it's a good alternative if you don't want to install iTunes or you don't want to install Chrome on a PC and you don't mind spending $15. It's pretty good software for that. Now, there's one other device type out there, but I'll be honest with you, I'm not very familiar with it, but it's something that might be worth somebody experimenting with. There's another device out there called the Projector, and it's a little box that does some of the same sort of things that we talked about earlier as far as Chromecast and Apple TV. It's kind of a competitor to those. But what I've seen with it and support for PCs is that you have to install a driver on your PC, similar to back to AirParrot over here. You're installing a driver on your PC with AirParrot. You're installing a driver on your PC with Projector. So my apprehension with a product like Projector is the same thing. If you get into that situation of trying to show a DVD or something like that, anything that you have to install a driver on your PC for so it can then mirror video to a projector screen may not work very well. Anytime you have to do that kind of conversion, software conversion, it kind of causes some problems. So with that being said, that kind of covers all of the devices and protocols out there for wireless sharing, which work good in a one-to-one relationship, one device to one TV. So I'm going to kind of pass it back to Tim Adams, and he's going to pass it to the other Tim from Minnesota to talk about digital signage, because digital signage is where you take things to the next level, where you may have 10, 20, 30 TVs in your facility, and you want to share information to all of them at once. Is it really the best idea to use an Apple TV, a Chromecast, or something like that for it? May or may not. I'll let him speak to that, because there are specialized devices out there that exist to that. So, back to Tim.
Yeah, so before we go to Tim Malone, I wanted to kind of re-emphasize this last device category. So essentially what the projector and things like it are doing, and I'm actually going to bring up another one that I found this week called the DVDO. What they're doing is they're kind of creating their own proprietary wireless network, essentially. And the projector does it a little differently in that it creates a network, and just about anybody can connect to that network, and as long as they have the driver, can send content to the projector for display. So in that regard, it's very much like the Apple TV in that, if I start playing content on an Apple TV and then I'm visiting Charles, and Charles comes along and says, well, I want to show what I've got, he can actually override me because he's kind of the last one to the party, and we can just fight for control back and forth. And I've done that. It's entertaining to a point. But what's different about this DVDO is that I'm not sure if you can see this, but it actually uses a 60 gigahertz frequency band. So it is well outside of just about any interference that you're going to see from Wi-Fi, from anything that's regulated by the FCC. So I will tell you that based on the research that I've done on this product, you're limited to about 30 feet, which is a real deal breaker for me because, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, oh man, for my church clients it would be awesome to be able to not have to run a wire from the tech booth to the projector. You know, well, it's great if you're in a really small church, but if you're in a mid to large church, forget it. This is not gonna do it for you. But I wanted to put this out there as an option, very much in the similar vein to the projector product. And that was a great intro that you did, Charles. You really covered that really well. And apparently you have something else you want to add.
Yeah, it was just the one comment you were making about the DVDO or whatever it was called. Devices like that have actually existed on the market for quite some time. I mean, they predate the Chromecast and the AirPlay. A lot of those do out there. But most of those that I've seen that exist out there, like you say, have that 30-foot range limitation. And that's what makes the Apple TV and the Chromecast such an appealing device, because as long as, and I'm going to get a little technical on you here, but as long as you're on the same IP network, it'll work. I mean, like at our church, if I really, really wanted to, since my Apple TV and my Chromecast is back in this back classroom, and I'm up in the sound booth in the front of the church, which is probably, I don't know, 200 feet away, I could sit on the computer that's got iTunes on it in the sound booth and play a video on the Apple TV in the back of the church because I'm on the same network. So that's what makes those devices so appealing, is because Wi-Fi and IP networks has just really kicked this into high gear versus devices out there that existed in the past are point-to-point devices, and they have wireless broadcast limitations.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I will say this. I got a Chromecast for my brother for Christmas, and the guy runs telecommunication networks, so it's not like he's an idiot, but he couldn't get his Chromecast to work. And based on the feedback I got from him, I did a little research, and apparently with some people in certain circumstances, there are distance limitations between how far away the Chromecast can be from the router. And the research that my brother did indicated that it was like 30 feet, which sounded ridiculous to me. But you got to remember that the size of the antenna, the Wi-Fi antenna on that Chromecast, is quite a bit smaller than even that's in the Apple TV. So, you got to think about all of these things ahead of time, and get what's right for you. But
actually, I was going to jump in there. I actually gave a Chromecast to my son. I have one, and it works great.
Sure.
Gave it to my son, who's a 20-something, and he took it home, and he couldn't get it to work. And I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, it wouldn't work. It turns out that on his internet provider, they blocked the ports that it worked on, or some silly thing, and so I don't remember how he got it resolved. He did get it resolved, but there was some messing around that had to be done. So,
yeah, another common thing that's a Chromecast are prone to, I think the newer ones that they're coming out with here in the last 6 months are not so prone to this because they've upgraded the Wi-Fi chip in the device. But the first generation ones do not do well if you have an 802.11n wireless router that is not dual band. Or even early dual band ones it doesn't work well with. Because I had a Chromecast for a while. The one that we have at the church is actually my old Chromecast that I donated to the church. But I had the Chromecast for a while. I gave it to my dad, and it would not work with his router, period. So then I took it to the church. It worked fine, and that's where it stayed. So another thing to kind of keep in mind about is early Chromecast have some Wi-Fi protocol issues. But if you're going to go out and buy one and its manufacture date is within the last 6 months, you're probably a little better off on that aspect.
Great. So, Mr. Malone, why don't you talk to us about digital signage? Why don't you kind of define what that is first, and maybe talk about some, where would be like the entry point for considering getting into digital signage?
well, I think you could look at a couple different things. One of the things you look at is how many screens you're going to have, the location of the screens, your audience. That's a big one. And then also, how are you going to support those screens? Are you going to go into for example, are you going to go into a church? And I'll get into some of this in a little bit here, but my real life work, I actually remote into my screens from my desk. I have 14 screens stretched out over a wide area, and I can remote in with the VPN software into each screen, and also through the software. And that's kind of an important feature, but that's also an expensive system. You can get into an entry-level system, and I'm actually experiencing this at the church I'm at now because they purchased a system and then had it set up, and it's very simple, very straightforward. It works great, looks great, but I actually had to go get a key to the church because I'm going to have to go. I can remote in, but I can't see if it's displaying correctly, if the fonts are too big or too little, if things are jumbled, if I had typos, those types of things. So I think you determine, obviously your budget is a big consideration, and everybody wants to save money, so I think that's kind of where you start, and then from there you decide how many screens you talking, where are they going to be at, how do I support that, and what's my audience. So those are the big questions, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. So what would you say are the primary differences between what Charles has been talking about as a solution versus what digital signage can provide for you?
I think they both are viable avenues, and I think the budget kind of determines that. With the wireless, I think you're looking at one, as he said, one device to one screen. Even if you have 15 devices in a room, there's only going to be one that's going to be interacting with it at a time. Whereas I can propagate either the same message to multiple screens, or I can customize each individual screen or even a zone on a screen to be a specific message. So for example, in one case I had a meeting at a specific time on 5 o'clock on a Friday, and I changed the screen from what it was to this special message that introduced or welcomed the people that were from this group in, and it only played during the time that they were at this meeting, and then it went back to its regular programming. So you can customize things, and actually it's a lot like dealing with the internet, because people nowadays really are driven visually, and video, imagery, and rich media are just driving things. And when people walk by and there's something engaging going on, they're pulled in. And so I think that's what these screens do, and they give you that opportunity to look at what you want to promote and then do it in a way that's very relevant and very compelling. And it's kind of like a web page. I mean, the old saying used to be 5 to 8 seconds is what you've got to get someone's attention. I think with the screens, it's the same type thing. People are coming and going so fast that unless you do it in a compelling manner, you're going to have problems. And I think either one of these solutions is actually really good for that.
Darn,
I just don't know if you have other questions. I don't want to go off into a rambling.
Oh, no, it's fine.
So, I can actually show you. Why don't I can start with showing you kind of what makes up a digital signage system. And if I can, let me go over here.
And a lot of people, while you're doing that, a lot of people don't realize that they see digital signage almost every day. They just don't realize that it is digital signage. I mean, you go into a fast food place or a restaurant, and it's TVs displaying the menu. I mean, that's digital signage.
Yep.
You go into the mall and you see ads on TVs in store windows. That's digital signage. So it's not a complicated concept, but like you said, the customization of what you can do with it, as far as, I mean, even breaking your screen down into different zones, and I can put a specific message in this zone for this specific amount of time that's really personalized to, like in what you said, to this group that's on premises for 2 hours, let's say.
Yep.
And after that, the schedule just goes right back to what it was.
Yeah,
All right, you're
exactly.
up.
I went recently to a Burger King, and they had 5 screens side by side over the top of the where the cash registers were, and they had all the menu, and it looked just like a normal menu board. And all of a sudden, at one point, everything went black, and it plays this little movie that goes across the whole screen. And it was crazy. I was like, "Wow, I cannot believe they did that." They had just remodeled, so it was incredible. But like you said, it's a good example of digital signage, and we see it just about everywhere. So, all right, well, I'll just start out by explaining kind of my situation. I work for a healthcare organization in southern Minnesota, and I do oversee 14 different screens. And I think I have a map in here. Right here. So in southern Minnesota, these are the locations that I have screens, and in some of these locations I have multiples. So for example, in Mankato I've got 5, Fairmont I've got 3, New Prague I've got 3, and then the other ones I've got an individual screen. When you talk about digital signage, I'm going to show 2 routes that you can go. So one route is the more expensive. It's more of a top line type system. It involves a server. It involves a player and obviously a screen and a network. And when you do those types of installs, usually you're going to want to use basically what's called a hardware vendor and a software vendor. So in my example, what we use is this software called Carousel, and it's made by a group called Tightrope Media Systems, and they're out of St. Paul. And they're really, really great to work with. They're not some big conglomerate organization. I've actually talked with the owner. I've talked with many of the people that work there. They sent a person out to help us and gave us a day of training free of charge. They've really pulled up the stops. And Marco is our hardware vendor. So if I need, well, last year I added 7 machines. So they did all the work. So basically what I do is I call up Marco and say, hey, I need 7 more machines. Here's where I want them to go. They gave me a price. We get it approved, and Marco sends a guy down with the equipment in each location. They put it, install it, make sure it's up and running, and then we have it all set up so that once they're plugged into our system, they're up and running. So when they installed our new machines, I had already had content ready to go, and they were up and live streaming within an hour to 2 hours after they were actually installed. So but that's kind of an important factor. And of course, every time you add more people in it, you're adding some more money. But the systems that involve these 3 pieces are the higher end systems. So on the left hand side here, that's our actual server that we have in our server room, and it sits on our network, and that can show up to 99 systems, or we call them channels. And that is the entire screen that you would see. So the little box that's on the right, the yellow, that is an actual player that sits behind the monitor that's up on the wall. And the monitors are all commercial grade. They're designed to be run 24/7. They're not just a plain TV. So this is really like the extreme other end of what Charles was talking about. There's systems that are a lot more expensive than this, but if you're looking at one of these systems, you're looking at about installed, buying the equipment and the software licensing and everything, like out the door, running, put up, you're looking at between $4,500 and about $5,000. So bigger churches probably would, it might be a possibility for them, but any medium or small sized churches, they're probably not looking to spend that much money. We talked a little bit about designing up your channels or your screens. And this is just an example of what we did with ours. We just divvied up, and each individual area can be programmed separate from the others. And then we just decided, well, in this pink zone, kind of in the left middle, where it says community, that's where our main bulletins are going to be. They're always going to be there. That's the stuff that we're going to push all the time. We want to make that our big thing. On the right, in fact, the one I'm doing at our church, I kind of divvied up like this. And on the right-hand side, we have the weekly listing of what's going on in the church. So on Monday is this, and on Tuesday is that, and that's over on the right event side. But you can divvy these things out. But this is one of the biggest things that I run into is people don't. don't do this, so they don't think about it. But I had somebody come up to me this week and say, well, so-and-so is going to put a calendar on there, and I'm going to put the bulletin on there. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. And they don't realize that you have to really go at it from a strategic point and say, what are we trying to do? Who are we trying to reach? And this helps give you a roadmap to where you want to go. So I do have some good news, because I know prices are crazy. This is the company that the tech company that the church contracted with found, and it was an excellent solution. It's called BrightSign, and they actually have systems that start as low as, I think, around $200 for the box. Now you have to provide your own monitor, and of course it has to sit on the network. So if your church is networked, it's not a big deal. Otherwise, you'd have to probably find a way to do that. But with those two conditions in mind, you can put one of these BrightSigns in, and they work. They're really, really, really straightforward and simple. I mean, you can kind of see on this screen on the left-hand side, there's a green box, and you just draw the areas that you want separated out, and then there's another tab you go to, and you just drag and drop your photos in. That's it. And then you publish it, and it just shoots it out to it. The only connection, or the only hitch that I had with this one was that, and I've been in contact with the company on this, and it turns out the unit we purchased, based on price, does not have any way or any means of being able to be monitored. So once I hit publish, if I'm sitting at home and I remote in and I set the thing up, get it looking exactly like I want, save it, hit publish, and it goes out, I have no way of knowing if it's actually displaying accurately or not. I literally have to go down to the church and take a look at it, or call somebody down there. So that's a big deal for me. But if you're trying to save some money, probably wouldn't bother anybody to just say, well, I'm just going to go down on Saturday afternoon every week, and I'm going to do the layout, and I'll get it ready to push out and schedule. And once you know things are working, it's not as big a deal. You can just schedule it, and then when you come on Sunday for service, there it is. Looks good. One of the benefits of this system, and this is an example of one of the BrightSign systems, the little purple box on the bottom is a really small box, and it has it's got VGAs on it. It's got an HDMI out. It's on the other side of the box. You can't see it. It's got the audio out, and so there's no server involved in this, so the cost comes way down. If you actually go out to brightsign.biz, you can see, and under their store, you just hit store link, and you can go in there. And I looked this afternoon, and they were running from like $200 or $220, up to like $600-700 for these boxes. And the ones that are on the top end of that scale are really nice boxes, and they do have some of that remote functionality built into them. It's just that the one that we bought, which is the lower end models, does not. But the quality on the things is very nice. I use Photoshop to lay out my bulletins and add my content in, and actually the guy that installed it called me the next day and said he stopped down at the church. He's like, wow, that really looks nice. And so it's a pretty straightforward, simple system. I think I talked about some of this stuff already, but I think it's really important to know what you're trying to accomplish, who you're trying to reach, where the screen is going to be located. Those are three really, really big questions, and how you want to update or implement your content. Once you decide those things, you can decide to use a hardware vendor to assist you with the installation, purchase an installation, and a software vendor for training, or you can just Google it. You can come to this group and talk to people and find out about it. Great resource. Or you can just put it together yourself. You go through somebody like BrightSign and spend a few $100s and get yourself a monitor and just connect it up to a network, and you can have multiple screens set up. You could add one or two as you have time or as you have the ability, and when you're done, you actually have a pretty nice system that displays excellent and does a great job. So I don't think you always have to have the the most expensive. Let me get off full screen here. My apologies. Yeah, you don't need to have the most expensive system to make it work. So I know that was a little on the high end for kind of what we're talking here, but if you've got a bigger system and you want to work remotely, um, that's kind of a breaking point as well.
So, Tim, what is the importance of knowing where the screens are going to be? And what do you mean by that? Like where they're going to be in the facility, where they're going to be geographically? Can you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a little bit of both. I mean, obviously you want to place them within the facility so that they're seeing you. You wouldn't want to put one of these screens where the person viewing it is going to be looking into a big window or something, because it's hard to see. The contrast levels are horrible when it's light outside. Um, you want to make sure there's good ventilation, those types of things. Geographically, I guess, is kind of more salient to me right now because, fortunately, I only live a few blocks from the church that I'm doing this at, so it's not a big deal for me to run down there. But I'm so used to my other system that I can remotely administrate these from 14 locations across about, I don't know, 200 miles apart, that it's kind of tough for me to say, well, that's okay. But it's okay. I mean, if it's a budget thing and it saves some money, I totally get it. It's not about me. I just think that you want to be informed when you go into it. And I think the biggest thing is if you know what you want to spend, obviously that's the very first part of it. You determine where they're going to be. Are they going to be in one church, or are they going to be multiple facilities? Where in those facilities are they going to be? Obviously, who you're trying to reach. And then if you know you want that remote ability, that's something you can ask your people that you're looking at hardware with. Say, I want to be able to remote in. I want to use Chicken the VNC, or I want to use Dameware, because just putting something out on these systems does not mean it's displaying accurately. And I've had that happen a few times too, where things don't show right, and I'll look in the back end, which gives me a preview, but it's not right. And then I have to go back in and manually troubleshoot the system and fix it. And it's not a big deal, but I think as long as you know what you're doing, if you're saying, well, I'm going to have to go down to the church to do this, versus, hey, I could do this, 2 in the morning from my house if I wanted to. I mean, we've all had nights where we've been up late doing stuff, and that's convenient for us. I wouldn't want to go down to my church, even with a pass key, at 2 in the morning, because I think the police would be showing up. So it makes me a little intimidated. But I think just knowing those things exist, knowing it can be done, because a lot of people will tell you, well, you can't do that. Well, you can. People remote into boxes all the time. We use remote desktop, and other products. So it can be done. It's just a matter of you have to ask it on the front end and say, well, is that a difference in price? And then you just decide if that's something you want or not.
So one of the other questions that I had, obviously there's a significant price difference between BrightSign and what you're using at work. Aside from the lack of a server, do you find that there are other constrictions in the ability to, say, send different content to different screens?
There's a slight resolution difference. I know on these BrightSign units there's a limitation, and I haven't quite figured out what it is, because the guy that set it up said if you throw too high of a resolution of an image at it, it'll just not do it. Not a big deal. One thing I should include in this is that it is helpful to have somebody that has some graphic design skills, and that's kind of a big deal. And so you know how to resize and re-res images, and then you just do it yourself, is all I'm getting at there. But I don't know, the end result is really good. They both look excellent. The only difference is just in features. I can put my carousel one together, I can preview it, I can upload it, I can time it, it'll go up, it'll go down, I don't have to mess with it. The BrightSign one, I have to do it and then walk out and look at it. For me, that's the biggest difference.
Sure. Anybody else have any questions for Tim?
Well, I just had a general technology question. I mean, I dealt with digital signage in a corporate environment about 4 or 5 years ago. And in our environment, we had some challenges where, people would make very high resolution home movies, if you will, then put them on a server, if you would, at corporate. And then our digital signage boxes were basically programmed to go pull this video from the corporate web server and play them. Well, some of our locations were on subpar internet connections, for lack of better terms. So when it tried to go pull this high-res video, it would stutter and play horribly. And we had to educate, our people that maintained the digital signage solution. I was part of the IT team that implemented it, but I wasn't the person that maintained it. The person that maintained it was like, administrative assistants and whatnot, right? So not very technical people most of the time. So we had to educate the people maintaining the system to take their videos and instead of throwing it on the corporate web server, configure it in a way that the video would get pushed overnight, if you will, out to the digital signage player so that that video would play locally instead of trying to play over the network. And I was just wondering if any of those challenges have been simplified, because 4 or 5 years ago, if you went to an administrative assistant and showed him or her how to do that, it was a pretty labor-intensive process, and I was wondering if they've streamlined that any.
Yeah, we don't mess around with videos at all, just for that one reason. But it was explained to me by Tightrope on our existing system that it was possible, and it did exactly what you said. Is that they actually would download to the server, and then to the player from the server, and then it would play locally, and that's all the content. So we do have times when our network drops out, and those screens will just keep playing. And the only thing that's wrong is the weather. The weather feed is obviously the temperature or the weather is not accurate, because if we lose network connectivity, it just goes off whatever the last feed was. Because we have RSS feeds for weather, for time, for a local TV station. You can actually go out onto a web page and say, I want this box displayed in this little area, and it shows a little local weather map from our TV station in town of the southern part of the state. And so we do run into those problems, and we run into connectivity problems when there's bad connection speeds. Obviously, you have those hiccupings. I don't think they've ever fixed that. I mean, videos are such a bandwidth-intensive thing that it's just crazy. It's a good point, because not only do you need to know that, but you do, like you've said, trying to explain to administrative assistants that maybe don't understand it all, you do need to have somebody somewhere that really understands how to re-res an image, how big files are. Do you want to be using a full-res movie or use a 720p? I mean, or even a smaller MP4. I mean, they'll work it just as well, like you said earlier. So there's ways around that, but you have to have a little bit of knowledge.
Anybody else?
That's stunned everybody. What? $5,000? Oh my goodness.
Well, I was thinking.
That's. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
This looks. I'm more video, less IT. So, if I was going to do this, this looks like you're sending everything over the network, and I think that I could accomplish a lot of the same stuff by having local video using something like ProPresenter or something like that, and then distributing that to various TVs. Now, I couldn't get individual TVs to do individual things, but doing that instead of sending it all over the network, and each TV has its own copy of the movie that it's streaming over the network. That just sounds like a problem, especially with corporate assistants who get new phones that take 4K video, trying to use those, which I'm sure is going to happen if it hasn't already. So I guess I was just thinking maybe this is a case where distributed video would be a better solution than doing it over just because of inherent in using video over those distances.
Yeah, like when I dealt with this 4 or 5 years ago, the biggest thing that was used in digital signage, and Tim hit on this earlier, the biggest thing on digital signage is RSS feeds. The more stuff we got into RSS feeds, that's what we directed the administrative assistants to use. Or kind of put it this way, some of the digital signage stuff we did was PowerPoint on steroids, if you will. It was like a PowerPoint slideshow that downloaded to the player overnight and then just cycled the next day. And we tried to cut out as much video content as possible. But these things can do video, but it requires a lot of front-end planning and maintenance that most of the time the end users that maintain these don't have the skills to cope with.
Yep, that's accurate.
Now, I know that Paul earlier in the chat over here had said, he'd be tempted to get a site license in iMac and use ProPresenter 5. My concern about that is, yes, you do have some configuration and customization in what you're sending to which screen, and you could probably set up a template, to say I want this section of the screen to be this and that kind of thing. Where I think that becomes, where it really kind of breaks down is, you have a limited number of layers that you can say, I want to route this over here, I want to route this over here. Whereas what a digital signage solution is going to give you is, I can break up that screen however I want, and I can send whatever I want, whenever I want, to that. So like if you're using the props layer to send content out to a collection of screens in the facility, and props layer in ProPresenter, I should probably explain that. I can't say I'm going to take this section and I'm going to swap it out for this content, but everything else stays the same, right?
That's not exactly true. I mean, if you use just the props layer, but there are a lot of layers in ProPresenter. You can put things on the masks layer even, which is crazy, but I did some experimenting this past week because we've just gone to a new center screen configuration where we've got a diamond-shaped coroplast as opposed to just a regular screen. And in doing that, our church isn't using that, but I got curious because I'm a ProPresenter guy, and I thought, I wonder if I can do this in ProPresenter. Yeah, as it turns out, in the mask layer, I can put an image as a mask. So I put a PNG with transparency where I wanted it to be, but there's no reason that I couldn't have put a picture there, and then in the props layer underneath that, switch that out, and then underneath the props layer on the slides layer, each slide could have its own stills, videos, or both, and then it can have a background underneath that. So we could get some pretty interesting things going. And I think we've come up with a great idea for an upcoming screencast. So if you'll excuse me, I'm going to write a note to myself.
Probably. Well, I'm not saying that you can't do it. I'm just saying that if you were doing an apples to apples comparison, I think the digital signage solution would probably come out on top. That's not to say that ProPresenter wouldn't be able to be utilized in that capacity.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I was presenting on Chromecast and Apple TV earlier. You can take those, cobble those together with some software. I've seen it out there, but I haven't delved much into it, and turn it into a digital signage solution. So you can cobble something together with these devices and make a digital signage solution out of them. I'm sure you can kind of do the same thing with ProPresenter. That may not have been its original intended purpose for it, but you could make it a digital signage solution. Ultimately, though, your true digital signage solutions tend to come with the software that, with the exception of video, that's a big disclaimer I'll give it. With the exception of video, makes it very easy for a non-technical person to maintain. Any of these other things like probably ProPresenter or even, cobbling together a bunch of Chromecasts and Apple TVs into a digital signage solution, you kind of have to be a techie to do it.
Yeah, and I think the key is you just kind of be creative with what you're doing. I mean, everybody's working on a limited budget of some kind, and those things you presented earlier, those are excellent solutions for wanting to do something really cool on a really limited budget, and yet it still looks really nice and it's flexible and you can do what you want, or you can move into the more professional, ProPresenter stuff. I've never worked with that. That's my next foray, because we're going to live video and streaming hopefully here, and that's another whole ball that I'll have to come back and learn from you guys. But it just seems to me that a lot of times you just have to be creative. You'll meet a lot of people that'll tell you, well, you can't do it, or it just is not possible, and you just kind of got to keep hammering and looking at creative, think out of the box. I hate to use that term, but is just really, really thoroughly research it and really come at it from different angles, because you may not be able to do some things, but yet you'd be surprised at things you can accomplish. Just like Paul was saying, you can use those layers and simulate the same thing. Well, that's incredible. I mean, and you can do some really incredible things if you just put your mind to it. So,
I guess what I'll say in regards to this is there's cobbling it together and making something that will work, but is not necessarily the right tool for the right application. And there's using the right tool for the right application. And very much like our last hangout, or one of our last hangouts, which was, how cheap is too cheap, right? There's a definite cutoff line between value and features, and at some point, value has to enter this discussion. If you get, okay, here's an example. Okay, so I can build a live production system based on nothing but DSLR cameras. I can do that. A lot of them out there have HDMI output and all this. Am I going to get as good a product out of a DSLR live production system as I am out of a system that's built around actual video cameras, built for the purpose video cameras with SDI out and all the bells and whistles? Well, I don't get the servo zoom. Yeah, I could probably figure out some way to get autofocus, but there's a whole bunch of new hurdles by using the wrong equipment. And that's not the other side of that coin is, if you've got no budget, or you don't have a big budget, and big being arbitrary, whatever your definition is, you have to get creative. And I guess maybe we could just all agree that with digital signage, whatever the right solution is for you is the one that is going to be right for you, and you have to decide what that's going to be. If you're cobbling something together, are you ready to support that if it ever goes down? Are you willing to invest the time and the energy to keep it up and running? Yeah, they say value, features, and usability.
usually it's time too. I mean, if you're using something that's not the right tool, you end up spending way more time and energy than if you use the actual tool that's made for it, because then it just goes smooth and you don't have that extra work that you need to do.
Right. And honestly, I would say, Paul, I would be really curious to see what you would come up with. As far as ProPresenter being a digital signage solution, because you tend to find ways to use ProPresenter that I'm not even sure Renewed Vision has even thought of.
Well, I used to work for a whole house audio video company, and installers would call up and say, we've got to make this one feature work or we don't get paid, and the bank is really mad at me, so I really need this check by today. And so I would figure out a way to make it work, and I would say, now this isn't what the engineer down the hall invented this to do, but I think we can make it work. I think that the moment the pastor says, wow, this is great, but can you send this to this screen and this to that screen, then it starts getting orders of magnitude more complex, and you just start thinking, oh, I don't even know why I even thought about doing something like that. But if you're, I guess, what Charles is doing is one thing to one screen. If you're sending multiple things to a screen, where I think you can get several layers and do some interesting things, but when you can also split that using distribution amplifiers and things like that to send the same thing to multiple places. But once you have to try and figure out how to add in a matrix switcher, then it just gets crazy and stupid. And I wouldn't suggest what I was saying for that situation. More the, well, we want to put up our slide loop and a ticker along the bottom. You know, something where you just can't justify going into multiple thousands of dollars when you can make it work for a few hundred. That's kind of where I'm thinking, kind of a middle solution. So that's what I was mulling over.
Yeah, and honestly, you mentioned matrix switchers, and the thought kind of came to my head. If you have a screen network, even in one facility, okay, you've got a foyer TV, you've got a TV in the mother's room, you've got a TV in the multipurpose room, and you've got a TV back in the choir room, let's say. All right, those could all require different content at different times. And if you are so inclined, you can wire those TVs into an AV matrix solution, have your, shall we say, your let's see, how many screens did I say? 4? So you could have your 4 digital signage boxes going into the matrix, and then you could have the video from your live production system going into the matrix. So the matrix basically allows you to put everything on the network, and then you get to select what goes to which screen at any given time. And there are pieces of equipment out there that allow you to schedule and control when certain content is switched to different screens. And I mean, broadcast stations do it all the time. And so, you know, if the choir needs to see what's going on out in the sanctuary so that they can come back out at the right time, then, you know, that's just a simple button push, right? So, I mean, there are many, many ways of doing what we're talking about. I think we've definitely covered a lot of ground tonight, and I think this is probably one of our more informative and beneficial hangouts, personally, because I knew nothing about BrightSign, and that seems like a really cost-effective solution. So, with that, I think. Oh, somebody else wants to hop in.
Nope, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to wrap up. So with that, I guess we're done for this week. And as always, if you have any questions, you can hit us up in any of the following groups or communities on Google+: Church Tech, Adventist Church Tech, Tech Applied, and Church Mag. So until next week, have a good time. Stopping. Seriously, it says stop.